Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn session. Today we have Chris Holloway from Recite Me. We're going to be talking a little bit about digital accessibility, as we often do, but from a slightly different perspective. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about the timing and the importance of implementing digital accessibility as a process and not necessarily as a to-do list. Right? So while we wait for a few more people to join us, if anyone wants to say hi, you can leave a message in the chat. You can say hi to Chris. You can do whatever you'd like to do. Just a reminder, at the moment, you may not be able to unmute yourselves or turn on your video, but any questions or comments that you have, you can leave them in the chat. We will, of course, pick them up later on in the session. And I'm just going to take about 10 seconds just to see if there's anyone else joining us right now before I hand over to Chris. Okay, I think we've got a few people here. Chris, over to you. I'll let you take this from here.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. Something that we've had planned for a while, and luckily we've managed to finally find that spot that I can come along. So thank you. Those that haven't come across me before, my name's Chris Holloway. I work for Recite Me, so I'm head of accessibility for Recite Me. My role there is to look after the consultancy, the accessibility consultancy, but also that digital accessibility being actually part of Recite Me and kind of, actually living and breathing how we bring that into our products as well. So it's a role that I've done now for a couple of months. And prior to that, I was actually a digital accessibility manager at PwC UK. So I've had a wealth of experience and I've been in a lot of these processes around how we improve accessibility into how we develop our products. One of the areas that I'm particularly fond of, and that's something that has followed me through my career. It's how we adopt and look after people that are using assistive technologies as well. So I've got a very good understanding around how we use assistive and adaptive technologies through digital accessibility as well. So hopefully you're going to see some of that as we go through the presentation today. What I will ask as well, if you do have any questions throughout the session today, feel free to pop them into the chat. We will hopefully have time at the end for a very short Q&A session. So feel free to ask any questions you've got. There's nothing that's kind of hidden off the table today. So even if it's just to ask something that you've had on your mind for a while, just let me know. My topic today is something that actually I don't think we sort of believe or think enough about when we go through talking about digital accessibility. There's a lot of focus that I found on compliance, which obviously is very important, but also there's a lot of focus on processes and changing processes and almost firefighting when we're talking about digital accessibility. So my focus today is not always about what you do, it's when you do it. And I'm going to show you a couple of scenarios of potentially where that's had an impact on individuals. But then I'm going to go through some of the areas that you can perhaps, just those small wins that can really make a lot of difference when you're bringing accessibility into your product creation, but also remembering that actually digital accessibility is a people thing. It's something that we shouldn't lose context over. It's about people. It's about making sure that people are able to use your products, can come in, navigate your website. Doesn't matter kind of what abilities they have. So I think hopefully we're sort of going to get through some of that today, and hopefully you're going to enjoy that. And hopefully my screen works. So hopefully it's changed over. So for me, I always look at this around, why are we only thinking about accessibility in the last 2 hours before a launch? For me, that doesn't feel like a very good strategy. I have been in those situations before where actually accessibility hasn't been considered. And for me, it's stressful for the teams that are developing the products. It's even more stressful for the people that are trying to use your products with or without a disability. So we've got to remember that this is anybody and everybody that's potentially using your platforms or websites. So what I want to do is show you a video first. Hopefully it's going to show and you'll get the audio through. It's a video created by Apple. I believe it was last year. It's one of their commercials. What I particularly like about this commercial is that it shows you the different ways in which people use assistive technologies, but actually built into devices. So hopefully let's see if we can play. If I can get a thumbs up as well, just to let me know everything's going well.
people think that having a disability is a barrier. But that's not the way I see it. You can catch up with friends.
Ready?
You can capture a moment with your family.
One face, small face, focus lock.
And you can start the day bright and early. You can take a trip to somewhere new.
3 miles to the summit.
You can concentrate on every word of a story.
A bird began to sing. Jack opened his eyes.
You can take the long way home. Or edit a film like this one. When technology is designed for everyone, it lets anyone do what they love, including me.
Brilliant. And for me, you can I've watched that video over and over and over again, and I always go back to those the videos similar, and Apple do a very good job in this. To really look at kind of and connect back to why we do this. And I think for me, when we talk about digital accessibility, what is it that we're actually trying to achieve? And for me, it can be many things to many people. A part of that is obviously down to job roles and everything that we do as as we go through our careers. However, for me, it's about creating content that's available to everybody. Okay, not just specifically homing in on those individuals that perhaps have the most buying power, the spending power. It's about actually bringing everybody into those conversations, fostering innovation. So really looking at many of the different technologies that you see, specifically in the Apple's video you just watched there, but also a lot of the different technologies that we see out in the industry, things like closed captions or pinch and zoom and everything that we look at around voice dictation. Most of them come from innovation, which are actually specifically or developed from something that was created for digital accessibility or accessibility and equality. So for me, it's about, first of all, the innovation that comes from the technology, but also it's looking at, you know, bringing the people in that actually would be isolated or excluded, that have got fantastic innovative ideas, and bringing those into the processes that we can get people involved in. So rather than disabling people from being part of those projects, or not employing people with disabilities into your firm that have some amazing innovative ideas, it's about creating content that actually allows people to come in and be part of that innovation. Okay, it's also about providing equal, fair, equitable opportunities for people to access the information that they need without discrimination. So having information out there that doesn't rely on somebody having to go and ask somebody else to help just move the page on, or having information out there that is, it could be quite personal or something that somebody doesn't really necessarily want to have to share with other people. It's a personal thing. Having to then go to another individual, another person, or a carer and say, do you know what, I can't get to the next page, I'm submitting financial information into a site, into a website, and actually I need somebody else to come and have a look at that, but or move the button along, it doesn't feel very fair. So I think for me it's about providing equal, fair and equitable opportunities for people to access information. It's also for us a human right for people to be able to freely access information without digital barriers or accessibility issues. We know as well as others that it can be highly frustrating if you're trying to do something, whether that is, book a doctor's appointment or travel somewhere, to only have a barrier put in the way that actually then isolates you from something that you're trying to do. So for me, it is a human right. It's something that I truly believe should be part of everything that we do. And obviously, I know that there are some barriers that come in, in terms of things like um, budget for your projects, or perhaps you've got people on your team that don't understand or recognize the importance of accessibility that can create barriers as well. For me, it's hopefully we'll go through that in today's session, but I'm hoping we can start to have some of those conversations around why we're doing that. So please use today's slides as well. I'm going to share these out after, just to help potentially bridge some of those gaps that you are having, and hopefully we can get to a point where we can start to win as a society. One of the things that we also look at as well is, we can all do the right thing to help improve accessibility. So, some of these simple things like such as adding closed captions to a video, or perhaps using headings when creating a document, they can all help, improve things like navigation or accessibility of content. However, if we're doing it at the wrong time, we can inadvertently cause confusion, frustration, and often fail people who need accessible content in order to do their work or enrich or support their daily life. So, if we are, for example, sending a video out and everybody else gets that video first, however, certain individuals, whether they have a hearing impairment or perhaps, do you know what, their technology just isn't working and their speakers aren't working, what we've done is sent content out to somebody that can't consume it. But what we're also doing is we're excluding them from the opportunities early on. So if we were to send a competition or something like that that actually is time bound, and we haven't added closed captions to it, or there's nothing on there to help with, actually digesting the content, what we've done is actually limit those people to an opportunity. And a good example of that is things like if you've got a job profile out, or if you've got exciting news about special offers, and actually you've not included that. So for us, it's not about how you do it or when you do it. It's about why we do it, and also making sure that you've done something or made it accessible at the right time. So I'd like you to meet Ella, who is actually late today. Okay, so Ella is flying in from London to Berlin for a work conference. She's booked her trip. She's checked in online, and she's trying to navigate the airline's websites and apps. Okay, so Ella, you can see she's very frustrated on the screen at the moment. She's actually at the airport. She has all her bags. She's got tickets. As the airline's booking form was built a year ago, with poor readability and no options to adjust the text spacing or background color, Ella is unable to read the confirmation information clearly. So based on that, Ella now misreads 8:30 as 20:30, and effectively turns up the evening and in the evening instead of the morning. So I think we've all been there. For some individuals, it's a little bit easier to kind of make that error. However, for some people as well, it's also around the accessibility barriers that they face as individuals. So they may have a hidden disability, they may have a long-term medical condition, or a condition that just flares up, like myself. So I, for example, I suffer with arthritis. Doesn't affect me all the time. However, when it does, it actually impacts my ability to travel or my ability to focus and concentrate when I'm in important meetings. So Ella has traveled. She has dyslexia. So Ella has dyslexia, which means she benefits from things like clear layouts, consistent structure, readable fonts, and spacing that supports things like focus. Some of the things that she did have a problem with, or confusing in design and layouts, the booking form confirmation was really crowded. There was loads of text on the page. There were multiple dates and time fields that were all really close together. So you can kind of see the picture here around, you're in a rush, you're trying to book something, you've got a work commitment which has got an opportunity attached to it. You now booked it, and what's actually happened is you've ended up with a booking form that's really hard to follow, really crowded. Perhaps, or perhaps you don't know that you have dyslexia at this point, or a hidden disability or neurodivergent condition. The flight times and check-in times were displayed in the same text, so actually it made it really difficult to actually visualize and work out what the colors and the text and font were, what they actually meant. So what Ella did was actually she looked and she realized that she'd got the date down, and there wasn't any way of identifying whether it was an AM or PM, or perhaps have helpful icons. So for Ella, she's now late. Ella also couldn't adjust the spacing between the font and the numbers, which meant they effectively blurred together. Okay, so she also had no options for things like built-in accessibility features. So, there were no tools available to help with things like text-to-speech, okay, that could have helped him read the information out. It may have made it a little bit easier for Ella to kind of hear it through her text-to-speech. There was also no way of removing distractions. So there were pop-ups happening on the screen. There was information displaying only for short periods of time. There were flickering images on the screen. There was also instructions that were really complex, and there was no way of getting all of the information on one screen without having to scroll around the screen. So you can imagine at that point trying to scroll around the screen, trying to get the distractions away, but also trying to find the information out whilst you're panicking was not the best position for Ella to be in. These are different examples of some of the assistive technologies that may have impacted Ella, but it would have also impacted other people that were coming to the site as well. So we mentioned there having to scroll multiple ways on the screen. For somebody that's using a switch device, or perhaps eye gaze technology or voice command, anything that requires being able to see the whole screen or potentially be able to navigate the screen easily without having to go multiple ways, would have had an impact. So that could have been things like switch control, which you can see the bottom right hand corner there, different buttons that actually plug into your PC that help you kind of navigate through. So it might be somebody that maybe struggles with upper limb movement. You may have seen people that use switch control mounted on perhaps a wheelchair, for example. It's those individuals there that are really impacted when you don't consider accessibility at this point. For Ella, she may have been using things like the Recite Me assistive toolbar to have text read out on the screen if it was available. She may have benefited from Dragon Naturally Speaking, for example, if she's navigating and trying to break the screen down. She may also have had things like Zoom text that can help with reducing some of the distractions on the screen. But also, we could have had things like closed captioning come in to kind of walk through some of the instructions on the screen, or perhaps had the instructions displayed in a way that was spread over a few pages that were much easier to navigate and broke that down. So, if you've not built at this point your service to be accessible and the websites to be able to work and be compatible with assistive technologies, it means at this point, most of the technologies that we have wouldn't work. There was also poor communication timing. So, we've gone through Ella actually booking on the website at the moment. We've had, a really poorly displayed information on the screen to kind of understand when the timings were. But there was actually no real complementary or supporting information to fall back on. So these can be things like sending reminders or prompts in good time. In Ella's case, she received the reminder email around 24 hours before the flight, but it contained the same cluttered information. It was effectively almost a copy and paste of what she was struggling to see, just in an email format, which made it quite difficult. So again, at this point, the timings wouldn't have been picked up, and Ella's perhaps none the wiser. There was also the mobile app that Ella tried to navigate. Notifications were sent only 2 hours before the departure, which is no good. So the example there could be if you've got to book specific travel to get to an airport. Maybe it's a wheelchair friendly taxi, for example, or you just needed to book something, or maybe you just really struggle with traveling. Maybe it's overwhelming for you, and you need time to prepare. Ella received that confirmation or that ping on her app 2 hours before. So by that point, she had no way of actually getting to the airport in time. There was also, some of the things that could have been improved. So improvements around communication timing. So we said about not being able to see the website initially to start with. Some of the things that could have been done is things like sending reminders more frequently, or perhaps even better, allowing customers to tell you how often they'd like the reminders or notifications. Is it somebody that needs notifications on what's happening with the flights, for example? But actually, they would prefer them in real time as opposed to every 2 to 3 hours. Um, a good example there could be if there's a delay to a flight. If there's a delay to a flight, could that then have an impact on specific taxis being booked or travel arrangements to get in? So I think for us, it's about looking at how we send those communications out in a more timely fashion. So, sending reminders out more frequently. But also, we said about Ella received a confirmation email that just basically had the same information in as to what she'd already struggled with on the website. So it's there. We've got opportunities there to provide information in perhaps multiple formats, and we do include things like multiple languages as well. It could be that you may have somebody going to your site that English isn't perhaps their first language, and actually they really struggle to read some of the instructions because they're overly complicated. Um, in this instance, provide information in multiple formats that complement each other can make it can make a huge difference. So it can include things like plain text, okay, rather than loads of graphics on the screen or things that are distracting or moving loads of things with loads of format. Just having plain text, or perhaps what to do when you're departing. Here's your time. Here's more information. We can also include things like more visual formats. So, we talked about instructions there. Maybe it's the instructions how to get into the airport, for example, or a little bit more information on how to board a plane, or perhaps ask for assistance. So we can do things like add videos in there that kind of break that down, which, in Ella's case, that takes the pressure off of the literacy requirements that she has. So watching a video for Ella in her own time and being able to pause it could have been really useful to kind of highlighting some of those things. So for us, there's loads of things that we can do. These are just a couple of examples there. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've got anything that you would add at this point on how we could improve perhaps the communication timing. So feel free to drop them in the comments. I will look through them as we go through. There's also some other impacts as well, and perhaps these types of things have maybe impacted yourself. They may have impacted family or relatives or friends. I know they've certainly impacted me over the years. So you've booked things. In Ella's case, she's now 2 hours late. She's not made the flight that she needed to do. She's also got a career prospect attached to this, because remember, we were talking about for work, Ella's going to a conference. So there's opportunities there for networking, which actually are now going to be limited because Ella can't get there in time. So, in Ella's case, she's arrived at the airport. She's exhausted. She's perhaps embarrassed. She's now actually assuming that she's at fault. There's a lot of things here in terms of, taking ownership of a problem in terms of I'm late. However, is it really Ella's fault or problem at this point? But actually, in reality, the service that Ella has been provided hasn't really been built in an accommodating and inclusive way. And actually, part of that is rebooking. So we talk about, some of the issues that we have in Ella's case being late. Now there's a financial aspect to this. So there's money that's been exchanged for tickets, for example. There's travel arrangements, all these things that impact people. Now, one of the things that disability does bring is a lot more strain on finances. So, for example, it can be much more difficult to find a long-term employment role. It's obviously more expensive, perhaps, to have, a lot of the assistive technologies or the licensing that you've got. But actually, in this instance, what's happened is Ella's rebooked a ticket, and it was actually at her own expense. And like we said, it was missing things like networking opportunities, which is kind of very critical for somebody in their career. So for us, it's around who's at fault here, who's the person or the team that should be actually bringing in a more inclusive way of booking tickets, making sure people are aware of what's going on, and then fixing that and making sure that people feel valued and they're actually able to use your service with disability. So Ella did complain. So wasn't sure whether she was going to, but at that point, she believed actually that, the company were at fault and there were things that they could have done better. There's a lot of places where, particularly people with disability, are having to give feedback. They're having to make complaints in order to get the accessibility that they deserve and they require. So in Ella's instance, she did complain to company. They decided to update their accessibility statement. Now, a couple of things happen when we look at accessibility statements. When I'm reviewing accessibility statements in my day job and my role, um, I'm looking for an accessibility statement that I really feel, represents the organization, but also represents that the organization really want to make their content and their websites accessible. So I'm looking for something that feeds me, it gives me the story around what they're trying to do, tells me about what their plans are in the future, um, spells out kind of their commitments as to, how they're going to make sure that they're including people in their future releases and websites. But also, I want to know, how much does that company value individuals with accessibility needs, or a long-term or hidden or even temporary disabilities. So Ella reads the statement, and it reads more like damage control rather than a genuine commitment. Okay, so it's about actually just saying, yeah, we believe, there's an issue, but almost still not accepting that actually that's the company that's at fault there, and it's something that they need to be bringing into their processes. Okay, so Ella feels like perhaps an afterthought, not a valued customer. And based on this response, Ella, she decides to book a future travel with a competing airline. Okay, and this is the difference. It's not just for Ella, but it's also for the rest of her team that she's decided to kind of discuss this with, but also friends and family and everything that anybody that would want to book. What's actually happened is Ella's kind of advised them that this website isn't accessible, and it was discriminating to her. What that tends to do then is it has a ripple effect. You get a loss of consumer trust. More importantly, you get a damage to the airline's reputation. Okay, so Ella, at this point, not feeling a valued customer, feeling that there was no genuine commitment to her, or actually anybody else that was coming through that process, um, decides to book a future travel somewhere else. So we've also got to remember that this might just be Ella's case, but we may have other people with disabilities, or as we know as the click away pound or the purple pound, um, where people with disabilities can't use your service, and they will look at a competitor or somebody that does value their business because they're more accommodating to accessibility and their specific disability needs. So, there's a damage to the airline's reputation. There's also that legal risk as well, around discrimination. So things like in the UK, the Equalities Act of 2010. We've also got those other aspects around the EAA as well as being part of that, so the European Accessibility Act. And if you're looking at other countries, so like the US ADA, there's loads of different areas that compliance does feed into this. Accessibility statements can be one part of that to really help build confidence with your consumers, make sure that you're really understanding what their requirements are, but also just bringing that transparency in. And that's where I see accessibility statements being really, really valuable at this point. Okay, so what would have happened if, for example, the airline had have tested their website with people potentially with dyslexia, but also people with other lived experiences or disabilities, or perhaps multiple disabilities at once? So what would have happened if they'd have tested it earlier? They would have done things like identified that instructions were just not clear. You'd have had feedback from people that were going through the site with lived experience saying, look, there's too much information on this screen, or perhaps there's too many distractions. What could we do about that? And it's about identifying those things early on. So actually, it means that they can be fixed, ready prior to any launches or prior to impact of people that are trying to use your service. There was also way too much information being shown on the screen. It included things like pop-up advertisements, perhaps for for things that are not even relevant to the page. So you may have adverts popping up onto a page that are trying to take you off to to something else that's got no benefit to that person and their journey on the page. So, it's about removing those distracting objects, giving people the opportunity to hide them if they need to, or tell you that they're not interested in that and to remove it from the screen. So in this instance, that would have been an easy one to fix, quite an easy change. There were also background coloring. Um, it was just too dark. So Ella, like most people, also really struggled with focusing on the text that was on the screen. Um, and the key here is that actually, because of that barrier, um, what most people using assistive technology would do is kind of lean on their technology, go, well, okay, can I adapt what the content of the screen is to something that I'm more familiar with? In this instance, with the airline, the background color was too dark. It was locked on the screen. So actually it meant that Ella, when she was using some of her assistive technology, it wouldn't work. So it meant that actually it was kind of really difficult to follow along. So one of the areas that could have been improved there is, making sure that it is compatible with assistive technologies, or perhaps there's options there on the screen, um, whether that's an assistive toolbar, for example, like Recite Me does offer, that just gives people the option to change the colors on the screen, or perhaps make the changes subtly to benefit them, so they can actually make it easier. What we could have also done is train the team. So because the design and the development teams were only trained after launch, they didn't think or perhaps even know about any of the readability tools or layouts. So if we'd have brought in training prior to any development or any design, you may have had development teams that sat there and really understood kind of what they were trying to do, maybe spotted some of the issues early on and got them fixed before needing to be told, or perhaps a complaint coming in. So like what we were saying at the beginning, not about what you do, because absolutely this organization here are trying to fix things now. However, it's more about when you do it. So if we'd have had training early on in the process, we may not have been in this position. So what was the impact of that? So it's things like developers spending days reworking the layouts. And actually, because they've now had to pull the team in last minute to try and deal with this, and perhaps, there's been additional cost involved in standing up another team, another project, the team are now rushing. So not only do they now have a live issue they may have had multiple complaints about, or maybe, they are now looking to fix something and they've got pressures of senior leadership, for example, saying, well, why have we not done this? What's actually happened is they've now tried to rush the fix in. And we all know that what happens when you make rush fixes is actually accidents happen. So in this instance, they reworked the layouts, they put in a rush fix and actually accidentally caused an outage on the service. So actually impacted everybody as opposed to just one or two individuals. Ella's valuable feedback became perhaps an unplanned project. It was built on negativity. So what we tend to find is if something comes in as a complaint and it's really rushed, there's limited budget available, people having to work over the normal hours that they would do. Also, perhaps we can't focus on some of the features that we were all excited about. We've now got to go back and fix an accessibility issue. What actually happens is you start to build in negativity into that project. So it becomes something more of a burden as opposed to a benefit, because you're trying to fix something. And consequently, because of that, accessibility feels more like a burden to the team, which may come across as something that people haven't, you may be talking to developers, designers, sponsors, and also other users as well about accessibility, and they've never come across it before. So this is the first time they've understood about accessibility. So what tends to happen then is accessibility starts to feel more like that burden. It's something that's not fun, it's not enjoyable. And actually, what then happens is it becomes less of a priority for the teams because it's not fun. It's not something that's going to bring enjoyment. Could you imagine if that was at the beginning of the project, and actually this feedback was that the product was fantastic? It's going to really bring your development team, your design team in line with saying, well, how can we do more of this? How can we really look after this? So what you tend to find is, developers reworking, extra cost, negativity, but also that burden of fixing accessibility issues that are kind of last minute things. Responding to feedback. So one of the things that Ella did notice is Ella's email got an auto response, and the auto response said that we're looking into it. 6 weeks later, she gets a templated apology. I think we've all been there. What happens when you really need to speak to somebody? You spent a lot of your time actually compiling perhaps an email, some feedback. Most cases, it's constructive feedback. But actually, what happens is when you get an automated templated apology that doesn't really address the problem, it can make you feel really disheartened and unheard. Okay, so Ella, she shares her experience on social media as well, where others echo the same barriers. So you can imagine at this point, something that was quite easy to fix right early on in the project, if you'd have done it at the right time, has now turned into something that is now more widespread. So, and this is a common thing, and I think we absolutely should be doing this thing when we do come across an organization that are not really stepping up to kind of that accessibility, the things that they should be doing, that commitment. I'm not saying we call them out on social media at all. However, we should be talking about it and connecting with perhaps other people that are having the same issues or the same barriers. Because of that, the brand's public reputation is seriously suffering at this point. So even though they are now doing the right thing, they have an accessibility statement that's been updated, albeit very poorly. They've got a team out there that are now spending money and time on fixing and remediating things. They've now had an accessibility outage, or a barrier that's taken the service down, perhaps loss of earnings from that. What's actually happened now is they've got a really suffering public reputation because of this. Okay, so I think for me, what the main thing is, accessibility isn't just what you do, it's when you do it. It defines whether people are empowered or excluded. And I think probably looking at Ella's case is 1 in a million others. We can also talk about potentially people that are coming onto your site with hearing impairments that really struggle with reading some of the content, or perhaps just want the captioning back or can't hear the videos. It's things like that that we really do impact people, especially for travel. I mean, we're talking travel at the moment. Could you imagine if accessibility wasn't considered when you are potentially signing up for a mortgage, or perhaps taking a credit card loan out, or buying a new car, perhaps even applying for a job role? If things aren't accessible to start with, we really do discriminate against people that can't get into the process and be part of it. Okay. These are some of the points that I've considered over my career. What I do have on the screen at the moment is just a very, very simple 5-step, 5 stages of development process. So typically there are 7. I've condensed it slightly down to 5 just to make it easier for the slide here. But what I am going to do is I'm going to break down areas of where we could have actually injected some accessibility considerations, or even some of the processes to really help with picking up some of those early accessibility wins. I'm just making sure that when you do have a product that goes through this process, it's actually going to be accessible when it's from day one, as opposed to having come back and rework on it. So just to read them out very quickly, and I'll go back through them. Stage 1 is looking at research. Stage 2 is ideation. Stage 3 is looking at development, then moving on to stage 4 of testing, and then launching. So if I was to look at these areas, where could I inject a little bit more consideration from accessibility? And again, if we're working through these and you have any other ideas or thoughts, again, feel free to pop them in the chat here, and we can have a look through. Okay, so number 1, if I was to look at research, where could I inject accessibility? So for me, it's about really understanding how and potentially why your customers will need and want to use your products and services in perhaps a different way. So in Ella's case, we could have researched a little bit more around what's the best way of displaying this information on the screen that means that it's easier to follow. What's the best way of doing that? And it could have been things like researching different layouts, researching the impact of why we've got so much information on the screen. Is there anything we could have done with this? It's also looking at things like um, time. At this point, because it's research, what we don't want to do is dive into granular figures. One of the things that I've come across over the last couple of years, especially when I'm talking to potentially clients, there's the age-old question of, well, yeah, but how many people does it actually affect? And it's almost at that point where you say, well, 1 in 10, and they go, oh, it's okay, it's only 1 in 10. We need to get away from feeling that one is still a person that actually needs to come into your service or your website. Why should we discriminate against perhaps that one person and just focus on the other 9? It's not the right way to go. So for me, it's about really not looking at granular figures, okay, but spending the time to understand how to build the product or service that is inclusive and useful. Okay, so that could be things like bringing in user groups, talking to them about your existing products that may be already out in the market and saying, well, how can we improve this? And spending some time and really understanding where some of your barriers are, so that when you come around to that design and that development stage, you already know about it, you've done your research, you have people potentially with disabilities coming into that process at that point, and kind of spelling that out and giving you that advice and guidance. Um, or potentially, why wouldn't you have somebody with a disability employed? Why would you not have them in your workforce already available to kind of help with this guidance? We then move on to things like ideation. So, you know, we've researched what we want. We've kind of got a better understanding of what the product is supposed to be doing. We understand a little bit about perhaps some of the existing barriers. Um, what are we then trying to do? So we're then trying to look at kind of how do we turn something as an idea into something that could be useful for other people. So for me, it's bringing people with lived experience into those discussions. Okay, but also, you know, if we're looking at this point, bringing examples in, or perhaps creating MVPs or minimal viable products, or proof of concepts, or just something that people could start to look and touch, we need to be making those touch points accessible as well. A lot of people at that point, yeah, it's just accessible. We'll fix accessibility when we've done the product. We need to make sure that we are accommodating and bringing in accessibility compatibility early on, right in your MVP stages, right in your proof of concepts, so that people can interact with them. Why are we not doing that? So for me, it's about bringing lived experience into that discussion. Also, like we said, proof of concepts, they're great at providing an initial idea. Maybe you're using them for senior stakeholder buy-in. Have you considered that perhaps your senior stakeholders, they may need a more accessible product for them to understand what it is that they're trying to do? If we're creating a product, for example, that has a lot of data and information, but actually your senior stakeholder, they quietly suffer with dyslexia themselves. They're just not very, accommodating. They don't want to share it. That's fine. I mean, individuals, they may not want to disclose a disability or an impairment themselves, which is absolutely fine. What we're then doing is we're not embodying accessibility into MVP and your proof of concept, and then we're serving up to people that are discriminated and perhaps not very comfortable in disclosing, which is it's a shame. So just making sure that your proof of concepts are accessible, build them on platforms that are easy to use, don't overcomplicate it, makes a lot of difference. Okay, three, we're looking at development. Okay, so development seems to be, it's almost the hot topic when we're talking about accessibility. It's the area that a lot of people focus on the most. What I wanted to do here is actually balance this out with saying, well, not everything that's about digital accessibility or even pets testing is to do with the development team. What you tend to find is accessibility kind of gets shoehorned onto the development team and the UX teams. It shouldn't be. Okay, however, when we're talking about development, it's about continually testing components throughout development. Okay, so we should be focusing on perhaps global elements. We should be focusing on things like menu navigation, making sure that things that need to work out the box are really good. So at this point, we're not looking at the content. we're looking at making sure that the platform that is being developed and built is actually accessible from the start. So it means that we're not going to have to go back and rework something that's quite significant a bit later on. Okay, so continually testing that. One of the things that I've found really, really useful over the years, and again, there's some really good organizations out there that are doing this. Where possible, focus on building things like a centralized design system. So instead of having every time you create a new product, it's a new development cycle and building things up from scratch again, what you're better off doing at this point is having a really sort of guarded, protected design system that kind of has components in there that you know through continual testing are going to be accessible. So it means that when you create your new product, it's more a case of customization as opposed to development. Okay, so the NHS and the gov.uk are really, really good at doing this. They're really good examples there. We do it in Recite Me, so we do have a centralized accessible component library that go into all of our tools, and my team in particular, we actually continually check the accessibility of those components. And actually what it means is if you make one change, it means that you're not going to have to go back over all of your products and do the accessibility fix. It just means that you're kind of doing it once, and you can roll that back into your processes. So it does take a lot of the heavy lifting out of for remediation in the future. One of the things to note there, especially with development, is you know what, you may not pick every accessibility barrier up. Okay, it happens. There are things that you know, through every testing and every will you possibly put forwards, you just missed that one little thing, and it does happen. The good news is at this point, if you've included accessibility all the way through this process, by stage 3, you should start to really understand kind of what you're going to test, and it should make it a bit easier. That being said, there is also that testing aspect. So, you know, things here is conduct thorough QA and accessibility testing. Okay, and I mentioned QA teams in there. The QA teams really do bring a lot of focus into that accessibility testing, making sure things that are working, they should be working, and they are. Aligning that with accessibility testing can make a huge difference, because it just means that QAs, they know kind of what's going to work there. They may do some of their own accessibility testing as well. It's brilliant if they did, I'd recommend it. But it does mean that actually, you know, you're not so reliant then on having a centralized accessibility testing team. Okay, so having QA teams, you know, really embedded into the process there can make a lot of difference. Now, when we talk about accessibility testing, we are looking at things like manual testing. So that's physically going to your website, working through some of the web content accessibility guidelines, which I'm going to talk about shortly. But bringing in those manual techniques, so testing to make sure that it's compatible with assistive technologies, testing to make sure that you know, things like multiple screens aren't going to break if you move across, and the process is simple. We've also got the aspect of automated testing or continual testing, which is something that we're seeing heavily focused on at the moment. So bringing in some of those automated tests to kind of just keep checking and, you know, spot checking your websites and making sure that you are progressing. But also what automated testing tools are really good at doing is tracking progress, which if you track progress well enough, it makes it so much easier to do things like write your accessibility statement and demonstrate where you've improved, but also show back into, you know, your leadership teams to say, well, actually, do you know what, that we can see through our automated testing that we're getting better at this point of the process, or, you know, we've just had a new launch and now all of a sudden we've got more issues here, but we know what team were responsible for that fix, and we can see that now because it's automated. It doesn't rule out the manual aspects. The manual aspects are so important to make sure that you are picking up those kind of real world accessibility issues. However, both of them together is the optimal. So you'll be looking at manual and automated together working well, but also don't forget to bring people in with lived experience at this point. So bringing people in with lived experience into the testing sessions, focusing on the usability, really makes a huge difference, because at this point you haven't launched. Still at that point where there's opportunities to roll back into development. You've still got potentially budget available at this point if that's how you work. You've also still got the leadership buy-in. If you've got somebody there with lived experience and they can demonstrate that there's a barrier, why would we want to launch a product that's suboptimal, that's going to have an impact? Um, that's the sort of thing that we should be doing at this stage. So, hopefully through stages 1 to 4, you can kind of see that there's not just that one touch point of accessibility audit, and then if it fixes and breaks, we need to go. It's about making sure that every aspect of your design process has something to do with accessibility as being a core focus in that area. It means that when you come around to launch, you're going to be in a much better position. Now, when we're talking about launch, there are certain things that you can also do at this point that help with the accessibility aspects of it. So it's things like providing clear instructions and launch comms. We often overlook those. We kind of focus so heavily on the design of a product, and we've got to get it out to market. And if we miss that opportunity, going to have a revenue impact, everything along those sorts of lines. What we don't do is actually just step back and go, right, are my instructions really clear? Can people really understand it? Am I sending really inclusive comms? Are we sending videos out that need captions? Are we sending instruction manuals out that are, that have multiple steps that can be read easily by a screen reader or somebody that's using voice to text, or a vision impaired person or blind person that they need to interpret that into a braille output? These are the sort of things that we should be focusing on when you look at those comms or those launch comms going out. It's also about making sure that things are stable. What we don't want to do is send out an update that breaks a website. That actually means that when somebody goes to use it, it's just going to be a really awful experience for somebody that's using assistive technology, and it just jumps around and it makes no sense. So in Ella's case, if we go back to Ella, we were talking about a really unstable platform that didn't give me the right information at the beginning, didn't get the information after with my comms. Could you imagine if that was another service or something that came in that was even more impactful to Ella? It's something that we should be looking at. So for me, it's launching, making sure that you've got a really, really well tested, well formatted feedback mechanism that's simple, it's tracked, so it's monitored. You have people there that are actively know how to deal with perhaps an accessibility barrier, or even recognize when an accessibility barrier is coming in through feedback or contact, and make sure then that's picked up in a good, well-rounded manner that's not just automated, that really focuses on what the issues are, really wants to learn about what the individual's barriers or issues are, and then really actively wants to put them into practice, fix them, and bring them into accessibility statements. There's a lot of things that you can do during that launch that are critical, really, to make sure that they're inclusive. These are practical things you can also do. Okay, so treating accessibility as a must-have rather than a nice-to-have. Okay, so look at things like embedding accessibility into your design process checkpoints, which we've just covered. Include accessibility as part of your overall definition of done. Why should we move on? We should be treating accessibility barriers as something that's going to be impactful for the service. Why would we want to? Why would we want to then launch something that's broken, it doesn't work, and it's not fit for purpose? Okay, we should be involving people with disabilities at this point. Okay, so there's loads of different charities out there that are ready, sat waiting to help with provide feedback. We also, just as a piece of guidance here, our team also provide things like accessibility consultancy and help with manual auditing. So they're the sort of things that you can get involved here to help you with this. I think for me, it's about also bringing leadership teams into these discussions. Okay, leadership is not there just to sign off at the end of the day. What they're there to help is to break some of those barriers for you, bridge some of those gaps that can get you to places. A good example there is if you come across something that is going to be really impactful to your service, and it's going to limit how, for example, how people with a screen reader are going to navigate your site. as from a leadership perspective, I'd want to know if there was going to be an impact. But also it's about making people accountable in your leadership teams, really asking those questions around, are you comfortable with sending something out that's going to discriminate against our customers or clients? If they're not aware of it, which does happen, if they're not aware that there's going to be a barrier, they're not going to be in that position to make a good decision. So I think at this point, bringing your leadership teams into those discussions, demonstrations are the way to go. They really make a lot of difference. So, if you are somebody that's developing at the moment, perhaps you're an accessibility champion, your development team, whatever, don't just go, well, actually, I'll just email. No. Bring your leadership team into a demonstration. If you can involve somebody with a disability in that conversation to help you with kind of pitching that back and demonstrating why there's a barrier, that's brilliant if you can do that. I think the main thing is just really bringing context around this. Every time I've gone into those discussions and I've brought somebody from a leadership team in the companies that I've potentially worked for in the past, or some of my clients, they get it. They understand. They go, wow, I didn't know that this was going to happen. We need to get that fixed. Right, what do you need? And it's things like, well, I need additional budget. Okay, that's okay as long as it's in scope. I need additional resource. It just gives your leadership team the opportunities to make those changes and support you as well. So it's very, very important that you're doing that. And I think for me, it's one of, that's why I put it here. We really need to get better at doing that and bringing those leaders into those discussions. So what I wanted to do is just break into some of the practical checks that anybody can do. Okay, so we focus obviously on, development can be really overwhelming sometimes. We talk about accessibility testing. Yes, some things can get really complex with testing. I just want to show you some of the practical things. So one of the practical things that you can do is, we can check that content doesn't rely solely on color. Okay, so before sending things like information out, such as graphs, emails, instructions, it helps to just check that you're not relying purely on the color as being the only way of identifying the value of something on the screen. So it helps ensure that people who can't perceive color, maybe they have a color vision deficiency, or maybe they're using a screen reader, for example. What we don't want to do is only give them information that they can interpret if they know the color of something. Okay, so using things like visual aids, like graphics or icons or different shapes that actually represent things, or perhaps even just saying it's green, they're the sort of things that can make a lot of difference going forward. So a good example there, I think we've all done it at some point. I certainly have. Instead of saying all required fields are marked in red, say all required fields are marked in red and with an asterisk. So it means if I remove the red color, actually I can still visually see the asterisk, and it just means that I get that I need to be filling in. So perhaps it's a field in a form, something like that. It just gives me the right information. Okay, so it's one example there. Here's a good example of where I've used color alone. So the left-hand side of the screen there, you can see there's a red cross. Now under that, you can see that there's a traffic light system. So you've got red, amber, and green. On the right-hand side of that graphic, you can see that I've changed it to gray. So you can see there's different variations of gray there. I've got no idea whether that's go or stop. I don't know. Okay, so the example that I have on the right-hand side of the screen now under the green tick is I've added color and I've added shapes and I've added numbers. Okay, so it's visual differences there. Differences, when I take the color away from that and turn it into grayscale, you can see that 1 is the red box or the red square. I can see 2 is the orange triangle, and then 3 is the green circle. So even if I didn't have the color in there, so if I said the 1, the square, you'd still understand where I was talking about. So that's just an example, very simplified example. What we can do is, if you wanted to check, we do have the Recite Me toolbar. One of the features on there that I use actually in some of our testing, it's not specifically for testing, so I just use it because it's useful, is I bring in the monochrome effect. So effectively what I do is I turn that on, and actually I can see whether there's content on the screen that I need to be kind of adjusting or changing. So if you wanted to just kind of have a go, that's a good example there. We can also check things like links and buttons are correct and descriptive. Okay, so you can do this before publishing your website. So you need to be checking that buttons and links are easy to see, but also accurately labeled. So a good example I have on the screen at the moment, just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, is on the right-hand side of the screen. I've got the inside of my cupboard at home, and what I've done is I've just moved some of the more commonly known labels to those. So now you can actually see that when they're not described properly, it makes it a little bit more difficult to understand what they're doing and why I need them. Okay, so it's really helping people with things like navigation of content. People might be using keyboards, they may be using screen reader, voice control. If you've got something labeled up incorrectly, it means that it's really difficult for perhaps someone used voice control to actually activate the button if it's not the right text, for example, or you've labeled it incorrectly. It's also really difficult to know what you're going to do with it. So, if you've got, for example, a click here button, there you may have 5 or 6 of those on your page. And if I've got click here for every single line that needs me to do something, but it goes off to a different action, it's really difficult to then follow what that means. So things like download the report. So it's much clearer. The link describes what you're going to be doing, but then gives me some guidance on what's the next step. So things like avoid using generic names. It makes it really difficult to identify what things are and what the links and buttons are. Here's a good example, so I won't spend too long on this. We can check that links and buttons are correct and descriptive. So the left-hand side of the screen, you can see I've used click here. To a screen reader, that could potentially read link, click here, link, click here, link, click. It's not going to give that person much context. Whereas on the right-hand side of the screen there, I've labeled things up with the really good effective label that's descriptive. And actually it gives me now, for a screen reader, I'm likely to get link, submit form, link, visit gov.uk, or link, contact us. You can see that it just really helps make a lot of difference. For me, I really benefit from this. So making sure that content is predictable. So before embarrassing or perhaps startling a person when they need to complete a task, make sure that your website behaves in a really consistent and predictable way. Okay, so people are not surprised or confused when they interact with it. So my example on the right hand side there is I was really looking forward to a milk chocolate cream egg. And actually it was that box, that cream egg so I've got on the screen a white chocolate cream egg there, was in the box with the brown ones with the milk chocolate. I wasn't looking, picked it out, got home, was really disappointed because I don't like milk. I don't like white chocolate. So, for me, it's around just making sure that it's really predictable. I expected to reach into the container and just pull out a milk chocolate one because it wasn't very obvious that they were mixed in together. A good example again is if I clicked a button that suddenly opens a new window without any warning, that's not really predictable. I think it's really good etiquette as well to just let people know what's happening next. They may be using a screen reader, for example, and they've spent a lot of time navigating to this page. They've got the content on the screen that they want. They click on a button expecting it to submit the form that they've just spent time filling in, and actually it just takes them off to a completely different site and wipes the form. It's things like that, or perhaps it's taken them into a page that has auto playing content that they're not aware of. It should be predictable. You should be able to kind of identify what's happening to a person that's clicking on something, or your content should be predictable. You may have seen these as well. So they're like trigger warnings. Okay, so we can let people know what's happening next by just placing things like a trigger warning on there. So the example I've got on the screen here is just a content warning. The following video contains materials that may be harmful or traumatizing to some viewers. It's things like that, just giving people that early indicator to go, well, do you know what? Do you really want to go to this page? Perhaps it's going to show graphic content on the screen. To someone that's using a screen reader at this point that perhaps can't see what's on the screen, it gives them an opportunity to go, well, I don't know what's going to come up on the screen next. I'm either going to navigate away from it, or perhaps I'm going to go and find somewhere that's a little bit more private, that's out the way, that I can then explore what the next option is. Okay, so it's just giving people that early warning and that option to kind of look away and go and do something a bit different. We've also got, making sure that content works well with assistive technologies. So before impacting a person who perhaps needs a website or reliant, or that they may be using assistive technologies right now, let's not create a website that then breaks that. Okay, so Ella's example there earlier was that we couldn't resize any of the text, the background color couldn't be changed, there was no way of removing distractions. So all of these different assistive technologies were no good at this point because the website hadn't been built properly to work with things like software, screen readers, voice control, and any other assistive technologies that people with disabilities might be using to access content. Okay, so a really good practice here is to use good HTML and good document structure. Okay, so there's plenty of different courses out there. Recite Me do have a couple of different resources that we can share. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to me. But also, it's about making sure that assistive technologies have been tested to work with your websites during that development phase. So there's some easy things you can do. So it's, you want to make sure that things like headings are really correctly labeled. HTML is the really good solution for doing that. We want to make sure things like buttons and form fields, they're not reliant on visual layout. All these little things that you can do just make it a little bit more accessible to assistive technologies as well. Just a very quick drop in. We do have an inclusion toolkit, which is part of Recite Me's online accessibility inclusion tools. I've popped the link on the slide. If you are interested in it, I've just added the link to kind of go and find that. It talks through some of the areas that I've covered today, but also gives you an idea of some of the tools and some of the metrics as well. I think probably one of the areas that have been most valuable to me is around, what are the different disabilities? I'm not expecting, anybody to go and learn every single accessibility issue or every single disability, or even every single web content accessibility guidelines. I think what's more valuable is that we understand and we work with people with lived experience or perhaps have disabilities themselves. You may have family members, you may have friends, family, or perhaps even present or past colleagues that you've worked with. They are the absolute best at providing guidance and advice on what works best for them. But also what they can do is they can share that disability inclusion learnings with you and build your accessibility confidence around why. So, including people with disabilities during the early stages of ideation, development, or creation of content, it will really help just the overall confidence around accessibility and how accessible your content is too. So I'm always really open with my team. I tell them that if there's any questions they've got for me on any of my disabilities, that always come and ask me. I'm always happy to kind of walk through how I do things and why, because I think that just makes a lot of difference to them. What we don't want to be doing is making people feel negative about wanting to come and ask a question. Okay, so learning more about disability is hugely important. It also helps bring context into some of those discussions where perhaps you're going to speak to leadership teams, or you're looking for sponsorship buy-in, or you're trying to kind of build an accessibility champions network. And if you've got a really good understanding of what disability is to start with, it just really helps with bridging some of those gaps early on, and it doesn't feel quite as complicated then. Okay, I talked very quickly about the web content accessibility guidelines. You may have come across them on the call. What I would suggest here is one of the things that I give guidance to some of the teams and some of the clients I work with. Go and have a look at the web content accessibility guidelines. Okay, so at the moment we're at the WCAG 2.2. What I wouldn't recommend is go diving in with both feet and expect to learn everything that's on this checklist or this guidelines. The WCAG is a globally recognized and adopted set of guidelines. So remember, it's guidelines, and it does help you make or sort of work towards making content more accessible. It dives into areas that are perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. So we're looking at is a platform perceivable? Does it give me the right information when I need it? Is it operable? Does it work with someone that's using a keyboard or assistive technologies? Is it understandable? Is the information I'm looking on the page, could I understand it? And these are all the things that the WCAG will will help you sort of break down. And also, as you've got robust, does it work with, for example, assistive technologies, but does it break every time I go to do something with it? Okay, so if you work through the WCAG, it does help with just breaking that down a little bit. I've picked on one of the criteria there. So if you go into the WCAG, it breaks down into those 4 pillars or those 4 areas. And then part of that is that you get individual WCAG guidelines. So example I've got on screen here at the moment is captions 1.2.2. It just gives you a definition of what it is. But then I found it's really good for kind of breaking down the techniques on how you test it, how potentially you could fail it if it's gonna fail. A bit further down, you can't see it on the screen. It does give you things like good examples or anything that you can improve upon. Okay, so I would recommend go have a look at the WCAG if you've not been familiar. If you are familiar with the WCAG, would love to hear in the comments if there's anything in particular that you love about it or perhaps don't. Go and pick one of them. Don't go through all of them. Go and pick 1.1.1 or something like that and just read it. Have a look, get familiar with it. Reason why I say that is because a lot of the accessibility testing tools and the strategies that people have developed around them, many of them are built on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as being that backbone of the testing process. Okay, so very important, but just take your time with it. We've also got options to things like built-in accessibility checkers or testing tools. So the example I've got on the screen here, I believe it's Word. I think I can't remember what the screen was I put on there, but effectively what we're saying is it is Word. So Microsoft Word, for example, if you're going through and you're making your document more accessible, there are things like built-in accessibility checkers. Take them with a pinch of salt. There's always things that you can improve upon when you're doing your accessibility checks. But it's also a really good starting point if you're trying to get teams invested in accessibility checking. So go and have a look at that. There are a variety of different other tools. We've got a checker at Recite Me that we're developed for this sort of thing. However, some of the built-in tools are also really, really good for helping you with some of those checks. We do have, like I said, Recite Me do have an accessibility testing or scanning tool. So if you wanted to hear more about that, please come and find me. I'm happy to walk through what that does and how we work and everything that it can perhaps help you with. Okay, so I'll leave that there. When we do this, we talked about, the manual and semi-automated testing at the beginning. There are a variety of different tools out there to kind of do this. Some of them are free, some are paid. Some of them work really well with being manual focus, others not so well. Again, it's looking at what your internal makeup is, so what tools you're developing on, what you're trying to test actually determines kind of what tool sets that you prefer. For us internally, so where I am at the moment, we use all of our own internal accessibility testing tools. It just means that we've got a really good idea, in terms of what our products are capable of. But actually, when we feed that out to automated tools, it just means that we're in a really good position to help support our clients. So, looking back at those manual testing tools, really get a good understanding of what they look like. Again, if anybody wanted any guidance or information on it, please reach out to me. Happy to walk through some of those tools that we have. I think the main thing I wanted to make a point of here is we very much focus on manual accessibility testing, and we talk about automated accessibility testing over there. What we should be doing is looking at them together. Okay, so they work together, and that's why I've listed this more around semi-automated testing. We should be using automated tools to help with some of the easier fixes that are kind of that can be programmatically checked, but then also coupling them in with some of the areas that we need to make sure that we're manually checking, and they should be together as opposed to sitting separate. What I would say is neither of them, so manual or even automated testing, can be done independently. If you are doing that, then you are missing out on certain areas of the testing there that you need to be kind of hotting up on. So a good example there is that automated testing would really struggle with things like reading order on the page. That actually needs a human to kind of verify and go, yeah, that makes sense to me. Whereas an automated tool would probably go, yeah, everything's there, it's not a problem, it's all marked up. A manual test would go, yeah, but it's not really informational. It can't be followed easily. So that's where we need the kind of combination of two that kind of come in and look at things like that. So very, very important that we're doing both together. Also, another part of that is user testing. Like we said, bring people into those opportunities to kind of really test what an image is supposed to be doing. For example, with alt text, and making sure that again, we've tested it from an automated perspective. Manual seems to pass. Gets to the user or the person that's supposed to use it, and they go, I can't use it. Doesn't make sense to me. So it's about bringing all of those discussions together and just making sure that we're comfortable with that. So I think probably my next steps are around, some of the areas some of the things that you can take away. So your next steps, I would be looking at a focus on bringing accessibility into your discussions early. Okay, the earlier the better. If it's something that you can bring in before you've even touched anything in terms of development or discussion, then that's even easier to do because it means that you are fully invested through that whole process. For me, learn more about the different types of assistive and adaptive technologies. It's how I started. If you really understand how assistive technologies are working with your platforms and your content, it means that when you go to look at things like the web content accessibility guidelines, or what the barriers are, or perhaps even how you prioritize some of the fixes, because that could be quite complicated as well. If you really understand what the assistive or adaptive technologies are trying to do with your content, it makes that part of the process so much easier. Okay. Also, it's about, and I said this earlier, it's recognized that there is a lot to learn. Okay, however, breaking things down into bite-sized chunks will make a lot of difference. So there's a lot of different opportunities out there to go and explore and learn. I've certainly never been bored with all the different types of learning courses that are coming through. Again, a very sneaky plug, Recite Me do have our own learning management system. So actually we've got on there some free learning if you wanted to kind of take us up on that, that's available. But I think also as well, it's about just recognizing that I've been in this industry for a long time now, and I still learn stuff on a daily basis. You'll never know everything, and if you do come across anybody that does say that they know it all, they probably don't. Okay, so I think the main thing is just recognize that there's a lot to learn. Don't put too much strain on yourself if you are new to this, but also if you have been around in the industry for a long period of time, just remember that where you started as well, and how you had perhaps some of your leadership or mentors helping you learn some of this, and perhaps give back to kind of helping with that. Okay, so that's kind of where I would sit. I think that's it from me. What I was going to look is if there's any questions. Just a kind of the caveat for me is there's never any question that's too silly to ask, and for me, I asked plenty of questions when I started. So feel free to ask any questions you have.
Thanks, Chris. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but what I am going to do is I'm going to allow anyone who's here to unmute themselves and start video. So if anyone would like to ask a question or has a comment, please go ahead and raise your hand, and then we can start asking questions. Also, following up on what Chris just said, I have left a link to Chris' LinkedIn profile. So if you'd like to connect with him and reach out and ask any questions, you can do that. And also a link to Recite Me and their LinkedIn profile, the LinkedIn page. Now, of course, that's an interesting session, and a couple of things that Chris pointed out, I'm sure some of you will agree with, because I noticed a few of our learners as well, apprentices who are on our training program, they've also brought up the same exact aspects, where it's not always easy to get buy-in from individuals, from other teams, senior leadership, stakeholders, because not everyone is aware of how much of a task this might be for one person to carry out. But if it's built into the process and how we operate as an organization and as society, I think that's where we probably will be making bigger strides than we are right now. Of course, there's been a lot of improvement recently, obviously, but instead of having to rely on a specific group of people to get all these things done, it makes sense to build that into the framework. And that's actually one of the things that we've been discussing recently as well. So we had a couple of individuals who said, once they're more confident with their skills and with the understanding of how accessibility works and how it should be implemented, one of the things that they've started focusing on, especially when it comes to getting buy-in, is to try and optimize the system that is currently in place. Where, like I said, something as simple as a design system, even if it's something that's been around for a while, it may be time to go look at it and come back and say, look, we've got to update the system. It's great, it works well for what we cater to now. But if it's leaving out not just 1 in 10, but 1 in 100 people, we've got to address that, because that one person may make the difference going forward.
Absolutely. I think yeah, I mean, your points there around, putting too much emphasis on just having an accessibility champion, it can be hugely overwhelming. And there is something in the industry that we focus on around accessibility specialists and burnout. Okay, that is something that comes up very often. I've seen it myself. I think recognizing that accessibility isn't just the accessibility team's role and responsibility. They're there as that bridge to perhaps help you in learning how you involve that, or bring some of those parts into your own job role as well. So I think there's a question I got asked recently is, how do I become an accessibility manager? And it was kind of like looking at it going, well, do you know what? I felt a little sad to know that actually people feel that they have to get to be an accessibility manager in order to be involved with accessibility. So for me, I always go on the premise of, actually accessibility is part of everybody's role, and you are, for me, as an accessibility specialist in the area, the accessibility specialist for the HR system or the comms system, anything like that, is actually, I'm not the specialist in that area. So it's about bringing those people into your conversation. So a good example there could be, actually, I don't create all the comms for our social media platform. I don't do it. It's not my role to do that. However, we have teams that specialize in accessibility, in social media access, and reaching out to clients and things like that. Well, they're specialists in that area. So wouldn't it be better if they were the social media accessibility specialists? Yeah, and it just means that you can kind of bridge that gap then. I think that's the way to go.
Yes, and to some extent, I think even if we don't label them as such, it makes sense, because it's simply a question of, okay, if we've got an accessibility champion or a specialist on board, their role would be more of a, I go to them to ask them, okay, this is what I'm working on. How do I make sure that this meets the standards that we are expecting of our work? Simple as that. If there, because that gives us multiple perspectives, and that's probably where we can make the most improvement as well. And
Absolutely.
takes that little bit of that overwhelming pressure off of them, so they don't have to do it. They know that it's a team effort, and it's not just one person responsible for everything.
Brilliant. And I think it's it's the next step around really celebrating that as well. So if you do have teams that are kind of starting to adopt, or perhaps doing some amazing stuff, it's about focusing on and celebrating and really bringing that out, and looking at perhaps even some of the small wins as being an amazing leap forwards for your organization and the clients and customers that you're supporting. So brilliant. Excellent. I don't think we have any other questions I can see, Rajiv, but I think probably what I would like to say is just thank you for having me along today. And if there's any questions that people have after this session, always feel free to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great having you, Chris. Thank you so much for hosting today's session. As always, we try and keep up to date on what's happening in tech in general, not just accessibility, but for the people who are attending today, if you have any questions, comments, or if you just have thoughts on how you can improve the process that you've got around you, and you need an extra set of eyes and ears, you can reach out to one of us, and we'd be happy to give you some perspective that's outside of your own. So we're happy to do that for you. In the meantime, if any of you joined us a little later on in the session, we will have a recording of this up on YouTube later this week, likely on Thursday, latest by Friday morning. And you could catch up on all, well, today's session and the previous Lunch and Learns as well. Elizabeth just popped in a message. She says, thanks for delivering a really interesting session, Chris Holloway.
No problems at all. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. You have a great afternoon, and see you again next time.